Launch of the Apollo 16 mission to the moon. It was an 11-day mission that landed 2 men on the lunar surface. One of those men is in the Black Hills to recount an experience shared by only 12 people in the world. Brendan Medina sat down with the former astronaut today for the story.
April 21st, 1972. The lunar module Orion lands in the desolate Daycart Highlands. Dust rises and settles into absolute silence. A silence that feels alive. Charles Duke, the 10th human on the moon, steps onto the gray surface. A fighter pilot, engineer, man unshakable under pressure. And yet something stops him. Something in the barren horizon isn't natural. Something in the silence isn't empty. What did Duke really see on the lunar surface? And why, after 6 successful missions, has humanity never returned to the moon in over 50 years? Duke under pressure. Charles Duke was born on October 3, 1935 in Charlotte, North Carolina. He grew up in a military family, the kind of household where discipline wasn't a suggestion and emotional restraint wasn't a personality trait, it was a survival skill. He graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 1957.
The United States Naval Academy at Annapolis celebrates its 100th year.
I then earned a master's degree in aeronautics and astronautics from MIT, the same program that produced some of the finest engineering minds of the 20th century. After MIT, Duke entered the Air Force, where he flew interceptor jets during the Cold War, trained in combat tactics, and logged thousands of hours in aircraft designed to operate at the edge of human capability. In 1966, NASA selected him for Astronaut Group 5, one of the most competitive selection processes in history. And out of thousands of applicants, 19 were chosen. Duke was one of them. But his most famous moment before walking on the moon came on July 20th, 1969. Duke was the Capcom, the capsule communicator, for Apollo 11. He was the single voice link between Mission Control in Houston and Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin as they descended toward the Sea of Tranquility. When Armstrong's heart rate spiked to 150 beats per minute during the final approach, and when fuel dropped to critical levels and program alarms blared in the cockpit, it was Charles Duke's voice that kept the channel steady. It was Duke who relayed the words that told the world humanity had arrived on another world. His voice cracked only once, when he said after Armstrong's confirmation that there were a bunch of guys in the control room about to turn blue from holding their breath. That tiny crack, that single human moment in a sea of steel-nerved professionalism. It tells you everything about who Charles Duke was. A man who could hold himself together under pressures that would break most people, and who only let the mask slip when the overwhelming magnitude of what he'd witnessed became too much even for him. This is the man who walked onto the Descartes Highlands 3 years later. Not a dreamer. Not a conspiracy theorist. Not a man prone to fantasy. A combat pilot. An MIT engineer. A man who had already proven in front of the entire world, that his composure under pressure was extraordinary. Keep that in mind, because what allegedly happened next demands a witness you can trust. And Charles Duke was exactly that kind of witness. Moonlight, music, mystery. Before we get to the structures, because yes, we're going to get there, we need to talk about the pattern. Because what Charles Duke reportedly experienced wasn't isolated. It was part of a thread of anomalies that runs through the entire Apollo program like a hairline fracture in glass. Invisible until you look closely, then impossible to unsee. Start with the lights. Multiple Apollo crews reported seeing unexplained flashes and luminous phenomena on the lunar surface and in lunar orbit. During Apollo 11, Armstrong and Aldrin observed strange light flashes during their trans-lunar coast.
Have reported strange flashes of light on the surface of the moon.
Bright pinpricks of light that appeared even with their eyes closed. NASA officially attributed these to cosmic ray particles striking the astronauts' retinas, a phenomenon later studied under the name light flash observations. And that explanation is probably correct. Cosmic rays are real. They do interact with biological tissue. But the explanation doesn't cover everything. Apollo 17 astronaut Harrison Schmitt, a trained geologist, the only professional scientist to walk on the moon, reported observing brief flashes of light on the lunar surface itself, near the crater, Shorty. Schmitt initially suspected volcanic activity, which would have been extraordinary on a body long considered geologically dead. NASA's investigation was inconclusive. The flashes were noted. Then the conversation moved on. Then there's the sound. During Apollo 10's pass behind the far side of the moon in May 1969, 2 months before the first landing, astronauts Thomas Stafford, John Young, and Gene Cernan reported hearing strange, music-like transmissions on their radio systems while out of contact with Earth. The audio, which remained classified until 2008, features the crew openly discussing whether to report the sounds to NASA. They described it as eerie, whistling, almost like a musical composition played on instruments that didn't exist. NASA attributed the phenomenon to radio interference between the command module and the lunar module's VHF systems. And again, that explanation may be entirely correct. But radio interference is real. Electronic systems in close proximity can create strange audio artifacts. But what's notable isn't the explanation, it's the reaction. 3 experienced test pilots, men who had heard every conceivable cockpit noise, were unsettled enough to debate whether they should even tell Houston what they were hearing. That hesitation, that uncertainty, it tells you something about the texture of the experience. And then there's the strangest anomaly of all, not lights, and not sounds, something harder to quantify. Multiple astronauts across different missions reported a pervasive, unexplained feeling of being observed while on the lunar surface. Not paranoia, not anxiety, a calm, steady awareness, like walking through a room you've been told is empty and knowing, on some level beneath logic, that it isn't. Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14's lunar module pilot.
Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell over possession of a camera he used on the surface of the moon, and
he later described a profound shift in consciousness during his time on the moon, a feeling of interconnectedness that he spent the rest of his life trying to understand. He founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences in 1973, dedicated to exploring the boundaries of human awareness. Alan Bean, the 4th man to walk on the moon during Apollo 12, became a painter, spending the rest of his life trying to capture something about the lunar experience that words alone couldn't express. And these weren't men who came back afraid. They came back changed. Fundamentally, quietly, irrevocably changed. And that brings us to the Descartes Highlands, to Charles Duke, and to what he found when he drove the lunar rover into a region NASA had chosen specifically because its geological formations didn't match any known model of lunar evolution. Now here's where it gets interesting. The structures in the highlands. The Daycart Highlands were selected as Apollo 16's landing site because they represented something NASA's geologists couldn't fully explain. Before the mission, scientists at the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston believed the region contained volcanic formations, ancient lava flows that would prove the moon had once been geologically active in ways beyond simple impact cratering. This was a major scientific question in 1972. And understanding the moon's volcanic history would reshape models of planetary formation across the entire solar system. So NASA sent its best.
Has managed to enter into our solar system. We'll leave you with this report which explains how the celestial visitor, known only as the Three-Eye Atlas.
Commander John Young, already a veteran of Gemini and Apollo 10, one of the most experienced astronauts in the program, and Charles Duke, the MIT-trained engineer who had kept his nerve as Capcom during humanity's first lunar landing. Their mission was clear. Land in the highlands, drive the rover to Stone Mountain and North Ray Crater, collect samples, They photograph everything and bring back proof of the moon's volcanic past. What they found instead shocked the geological community. The rocks weren't volcanic at all. Sample after sample, collected across 3 EVAs totaling over 20 hours and 20 minutes on the surface, turned out to be breccias, impact-shattered rocks, fragments of the lunar crust pulverized and fused together by ancient collisions. The entire volcanic hypothesis for the Descartes region collapsed overnight. And when the samples reached the Lunar Receiving Laboratory in Houston, scientists had to fundamentally revise their understanding of the Highlands. That's a verified, documented, peer-reviewed result. Apollo 16 didn't find what it was looking for. But here's the part that lingers. If the geological expectations were that wrong, if the best minds at NASA fundamentally misread the terrain from orbit, then what else about the Daycart Highlands might have been misunderstood? And here's where the official record and the unofficial testimony begin to diverge. According to NASA's mission account, Apollo 16 was a successful geological survey. The crew collected 95.8 kilograms of lunar samples, the second largest haul of any Apollo mission. Duke and Young photographed formations with their modified Hasselblad 500 EL cameras, each loaded with specially designed thin-base Kodak film capable of capturing extraordinary detail in the harsh lunar lighting. And the cameras had no viewfinder. Astronauts aimed by pointing the chest-mounted camera in the general direction of their subject and hoping the wide-angle lens captured the target. Despite this limitation, the Apollo program produced thousands of usable images across all missions, thousands. Except for certain stretches of Apollo 16's second E-5A. But before we get to the photographs, we need to talk about what Duke allegedly saw. Something surfaced over the decades. Something happened during the traverse toward Station 4 near Stone Mountain that doesn't appear in any official mission report. As Duke drove the rover across the highland terrain that had already defied every prediction NASA's geologists had made, he allegedly encountered formations that stopped him cold. They're not geological curiosities, not unusual rock patterns, structures, shapes that, according to his alleged description, displayed geometric regularity inconsistent with any natural process. Right angles where lunar geology produces curves, parallel lines where 4 billion years of impacts create only chaos, surfaces that appeared smooth, impossibly smooth, in an environment where every exposed surface is pitted by eons of micrometeorite bombardment. Duke reportedly keyed his radio and described what he was seeing and waited for a response. The response, according to these accounts, was silence. Not the silence of a dropped signal. Apollo 16's S-band communications with Houston via the unified relay system were functioning normally during this window, as confirmed by mission transcripts before and after the alleged event. Not a technical malfunction. The deliberate, heavy silence of people choosing their next words very carefully. And when Houston finally spoke, no excitement from a team of scientists. No excitement from a team of scientists who should have been electrified by anomalous formations on a world that had already surprised them once that day. Just silence. And then, an order to leave. Now, this is where intellectual honesty requires us to pause. This testimony has never been officially confirmed by NASA. Charles Duke has made various statements over the years about his lunar experience, but the specific details about artificial structures have come primarily from secondary sources, researchers, and interpretations of fragmented accounts. Duke himself has been a devout Christian since a spiritual transformation in 1978. And he has spoken openly about how the moon experience changed his life.
Charlie, an astronaut, and Charlie is one of only 12 men to ever walk on the moon, and that is amazing, and I'm in awe.
But he has been careful about what he says publicly regarding anything outside the official mission parameters. We need to hold space for the possibility that these accounts are embellished, misattributed, or simply wrong. But we also need to acknowledge something verifiable. And the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal, a publicly accessible NASA archive maintained by lunar historian Eric Jones, contains a detailed catalog of every photograph taken during each Apollo mission. For Apollo 16, the record is remarkably complete, except during specific windows of the second EVA. A significant number of frames from that traverse are listed as missing, overexposed, or otherwise unusable. NASA has attributed these gaps to camera malfunctions and film exposure errors, explanations that are entirely plausible. The Hasselblad cameras operated in temperature swings ranging from -280 to +260 degrees Fahrenheit. The Kodak film was pushing the limits of what emulsion chemistry could survive. Degradation happened on every mission, but here's what the researchers noticed. The gaps correspond precisely with the time frame during which Duke was allegedly in the vicinity of Stone Mountain, the exact window when, according to unofficial accounts, he encountered something that shouldn't have been there. On every other Apollo mission, camera malfunctions produced random gaps scattered throughout the EVA timeline. On Apollo 16's second EVA, the gaps cluster. They concentrate around a single location and a single time frame, like a redaction in a document that's otherwise perfectly legible. Coincidence is always possible, but coincidences have a weight, and by 1972, they had accumulated enough to form a pattern that some researchers believe points to something far more deliberate than broken cameras and overexposed film. Apollo Astronaut Secrets. If Charles Duke were the only Apollo astronaut to say unusual things about what he experienced beyond Earth, this would be a footnote, a curiosity, and an aging pilot's memory blurred by time and transformed by faith. But he isn't the only one. Not even close. Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon, a man whose name is synonymous with the Apollo program itself, made a statement in 2009 that sent shockwaves through the space community. Speaking on C-SPAN, Aldrin discussed the Martian moon Phobos and a peculiar feature on its surface, a monolith, a large rectangular and apparently anomalous structure photographed by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. Aldrin didn't whisper this in a backroom interview with a conspiracy website. He said it on national television, calmly, clearly, and without qualification. He said we should visit Phobos and investigate it. He said plainly that a monolith, a very unusual structure, was on the surface of that small moon. NASA's imaging confirms the object exists. It's approximately 85 meters tall and casts a long shadow across the Phobos surface. The official explanation is that it's a geological feature, a boulder, and it may well be. Boulders exist. Unusual shapes occur in nature. But Buzz Aldrin chose to call it a monolith, and he chose to say it publicly. That choice of words from that particular man is not accidental. Then there's Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14, the sixth man to walk on the moon. Mitchell didn't hint at what he believed, and he stated it outright in multiple interviews over several decades that extraterrestrial intelligence has made contact with humanity and that governments have concealed the evidence. In a 2008 interview, he said it plainly that officials at NASA and the military had confirmed this to him privately. He maintained this position until his death in 2016. He never retracted it. He never softened it. He never said he was joking. And then there's Al Worden, command module pilot for Apollo 15, and the man who orbited the moon alone while David Scott and James Irwin explored the surface below. In a 2017 interview on a British television program, Worden was asked point-blank whether he believed extraterrestrials had visited Earth. His answer was striking. He said, "We are the aliens."
UFOs out there and the possibility of more being out there than what we've ever been led to understand.
He referenced ancient Sumerian texts and suggested that humanity's origins might not be what conventional history claims. He said it with a small smile, but his eyes were completely serious. Worden passed away in 2020, Mitchell in 2016. The generation of men who walked on the moon is almost gone. And a striking number of them, in their final years, chose to make statements that didn't align with the official narrative they'd spent decades supporting. Now, there are reasonable explanations for all of this: aging, legacy building, the human tendency to mythologize one's own experiences, the desire to remain relevant in a world that had largely moved on from the Apollo era. All of that is possible. But consider this. These men had nothing to gain. By the time they made these statements, their careers were behind them. Their reputations were secure. They had already achieved the single most extraordinary accomplishment any human being has ever achieved. They didn't need attention. They didn't need book deals. They didn't need YouTube views. So why say it? Why risk being labeled eccentric or confused? Yet the way you believe something you've seen. The way you believe something you've seen with your own eyes. And this is where history takes a sharp turn. Because the question isn't just what these men saw, it's what happened after they came home. Moon Mission Secrets, December 14th, 1972. Gene Cernan climbs the ladder of the Apollo 17 lunar module for the last time.
Gene Cernan, the last man to walk on the moon, is being remembered this morning.
He pauses on the surface, looks across the Taurus-Littrow Valley, and speaks the last words any human being has said while standing on the moon. He talks about challenge and hope and humanity's destiny among the stars. And then he leaves, and no one goes back. Not for a decade, not for a generation, not for over half a century. As of today, Eugene Cernan's footprints in the Taurus-Littrow Valley remain the last human tracks on the lunar surface. And the official reasons for that are well documented. The Vietnam War was hemorrhaging the federal budget. Public interest in the Apollo program had declined sharply. By Apollo 14, television networks were barely covering the missions. The political motivation that had driven the space race, beating the Soviet Union, had been satisfied. Nixon needed budget cuts, and NASA was an easy target. Apollo 18, 19, and 20 were canceled. The hardware that had already been built, Saturn V rockets, command modules, lunar modules,
lunar module for the most delicate part of this or any mission, setting men down safely on another planet,
was either repurposed or sent to museums. These are real, documented, verifiable facts. The cancellation of Apollo was a political and economic decision. That part isn't in dispute. But here's what doesn't quite add up. The United States had achieved the single greatest technological triumph in human history. It had developed the infrastructure, the expertise, and the institutional knowledge to send human beings to another world and bring them home safely. Repeatedly, 6 times. That capability represented an investment equivalent to over $200 billion in today's currency. It was, by any measure, the most complex engineering project ever undertaken by any civilization. And then they just stopped. Not paused, stopped, shut it down, dismantled the production lines, let the engineers retire or scatter to other agencies, allowed the institutional knowledge to atrophy until that by the time NASA began seriously discussing a return to the moon in the 2000s, they had to essentially start over. That's not how institutions protect generational investments. That's not how governments preserve hard-won capabilities. That's how you walk away from something you've decided, quietly, at the highest levels, that you'd rather not continue. Some researchers have suggested an alternative explanation. Not as a replacement for the political and economic factors, those were real, but as the invisible variable that made the political decision easier. The one factor that appears in no budget document, no congressional testimony, no official NASA history. Fear. Not fear of the moon. Fear of what continuing to send people to the moon might force them to acknowledge publicly. Fear that the anomalies accumulating across mission after mission, the lights, the sounds, the feelings, and the structures might eventually produce evidence so unambiguous that it couldn't be filed away in classified archives or dismissed as cosmic rays and camera malfunctions. Fear that the next crew might bring back proof, and proof would change everything. Not just science, not just theology, everything. The entire framework through which humanity understands its place in the universe. The power structures, the economic systems, the religions, and the national identities built on the assumption that we are alone, that we are the pinnacle, that the cosmos is ours to explore and claim. If someone or something was already there, all of that collapses. It was easier to stop going. Not because the moon was boring, not because there was nothing left to learn, but because some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. And the people who controlled the keys in 1972 may have decided that this particular door was better left shut. And that's not a fact. It's a possibility. But it's a possibility that explains the single strangest decision in the history of human exploration. The decision to achieve the impossible and then walk away from it forever. The moon is still up there tonight, silently orbiting, unchanged, untouched. A witness to what 12 men saw and could never fully explain. The photographs, the recordings, the transcripts, all pieces of a puzzle we were never meant to complete. But the question lingers. What did they truly encounter in that silent gray wilderness? And more importantly, what does it mean for us now, sitting on Earth, looking up at the same cold surface they once walked? The story isn't over, not by a long shot.